Have you ever felt invisible? Like people talk over you, interrupt you, or forget to greet you first. That's not just a mood, it's a signal. As we age, it can feel like the world turns down the volume on our presence. But you don't have to be loud to be seen again. Today, I want to share 7 simple techniques that can help you regain respect, influence, and attention in your own quiet, dignified way. 1. Let me start with something simple. Don't rush your words. Just pause. Many older adults tell me they feel like they're being talked over or dismissed in group conversations. It's not always because their voices are quieter, though that can be part of it, but more often it's because they're trying to speak too quickly. In an effort to keep up or be polite, they rush their words, hoping to slip something in before the next interruption. But what ends up happening is the opposite. Their thoughts get lost, their presence fades into the background, and the moment is gone. I want you to know this is a common experience, and it doesn't mean you've lost your value or that what you say doesn't matter. It just means the rhythm of the room might need to shift, and you can help set that rhythm. I remember a conversation with George, a 72-year-old retired engineer from Des Moines, Iowa. He told me he'd stopped sharing stories at family dinners because his grandkids always seemed to talk over him. I'm just background noise to them now, he said, and I could feel the weight of that sentence. Another client, Lucille, 68, from Austin, Texas, shared something similar. Every time she tried to share a thought in her book club, someone jumped in before she could finish. At first, she thought maybe her ideas were no longer interesting. But then we talked about timing and how powerful it is to let silence do some of the talking. I encouraged her to try a small pause before speaking and to pause again after a key sentence. She called it my invisible microphone. She said when she used it, people started leaning in instead of looking away. She felt seen again. Not because she was louder, but because her words landed with weight. What often helps, and this might sound almost too simple, is using deliberate pauses. Just a breath or two before you start speaking, and another short pause after your main point. This slows the conversation down just enough to help others really hear you. You don't need to rush to keep up. You can guide the tone. You set the pace, not the room. And here's something I've learned. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strength when it comes from intention. A well-placed pause can say more than a paragraph. And your words, they matter. Let them arrive slowly. Let them stay. Here's something many people overlook. Your body speaks before your voice does. As we get older, it's not just our words that people hear differently, it's how we carry ourselves. And the truth is, people often make quick assumptions based on posture and eye contact before we even say a word. I've seen it time and again. Someone who slouches or avoids eye contact often gets ignored or interrupted, even when they have something important to say. It's not fair, but it's real. Your body posture and the way you meet someone's eyes send strong signals, and you can use those signals to reclaim attention, even in a quiet, respectful way. You don't need to raise your voice to be noticed, but you do need to show that you're present. I remember working with Mary, a 68-year-old retired teacher from Pennsylvania. She came to one of our community groups and told me she hated family gatherings. I always feel invisible, she said. At first, she thought her family was just too busy or distracted. But after watching herself on video during a group exercise, she noticed something surprising. She almost always looked down when talking, and her shoulders were rounded forward. I didn't realize how small I made myself, she admitted. Around the same time, I was coaching Harold, 73, a widower from Kansas City. He was trying to reconnect socially after a long period of isolation. In group settings, he often felt like people dismissed his input. We worked on posture, nothing dramatic, just sitting upright and looking people in the eye. The change in response was immediate. I didn't say anything different, he told me later, but people finally looked back. One of the simplest things you can do, and this takes no extra energy or preparation, is to gently lift your chest, roll your shoulders back, and make calm eye contact when speaking. You don't have to stare or hold a rigid pose. Just sit or stand in a way that says, I'm here, I'm part of this, and I'm not hiding. This alone can shift how people treat you in conversation. You are not invisible. Even in silence, your presence matters. The way you hold yourself reminds others, and sometimes even yourself, that you're still very much here, and still someone worth hearing. Here's a small habit that carries surprising power. Start using people's names more often. It might seem like a tiny detail, but when you call someone by their name, it immediately makes the interaction more human, more respectful, and more balanced. As we age, it's easy to feel like service staff, medical workers, or even younger relatives see us more as a task than as a person, and that hurts. But there's something deeply disarming about hearing your own name, especially when it's said gently and with intention. It creates a little bridge. And that bridge works both ways. When you name someone, they're more likely to see you, hear you, and respond with kindness. You don't have to speak loudly or push for attention. Sometimes calling someone by name is enough to shift the tone of the whole conversation. I remember Walter, 75, a former auto shop owner from Boise, Idaho. He told me during a check-in that he often felt rushed through his medical visits. Nurses came in and out, technicians barely looked up from their screens, and even though everyone was polite, it felt cold. I asked him to try something simple next time a nurse came in, just greet her by name. The change was almost instant. They started calling me Mr. Walter. He laughed, and they actually stayed in the room a few seconds longer. I've seen the same thing with Beverly, 69, who lives in Sacramento and gets her groceries delivered. She used to feel like the delivery people saw her as just another stop. Then one day, she looked at the name on the bag and said, "Thanks, Carla, stay warm out there." The young woman smiled, said she'd see her next week, and started chatting with her each time. Now Beverly says she actually looks forward to those small moments. It reminded her that relationships aren't always about long talks. Sometimes they start with just a name. One of the easiest ways to be noticed, gently, respectfully, is to say someone's name in conversation. Whether it's your doctor, the person helping you at the store, or your own grandchild, using their name makes them feel seen, and in turn, they're far more likely to really see you too. It doesn't take much effort, just a little awareness and consistency. There's something almost sacred about a name. It's more than a label, it's a signal that says, "I see you as a person." And when you send that signal, it often comes right back to you. You're not asking for attention, you're offering respect. And that respect has a quiet way of making you stand out. Let me put it this way: you don't need to apologize just to be part of the conversation. One pattern I often see with older adults is a tendency to downplay their own thoughts. It usually sounds like, "Maybe I'm wrong, but," or "I'm probably overthinking this." That kind of language may seem polite, but over time, it tells others and even yourself that your opinion carries less weight. Part of this comes from years of being told to avoid conflict, to stay humble, or to let others lead. But when it becomes a habit, it can slowly chip away at your confidence, and people start to overlook your input, even when it's valuable. And I want you to hear this clearly: your voice still matters, and your life experience has real weight. You don't need to shrink yourself just to fit in. I worked with Patricia, a 70-year-old former librarian from Minneapolis. She joined a volunteer committee in her neighborhood and had great ideas for improving how they handled local events. But at one meeting, when someone suggested a plan she knew would cause confusion, she stayed quiet. "I didn't want to sound pushy," she told me later, "so I just let it go." A week later, that plan created a scheduling mess, and she regretted not speaking up. Another client, Russell, 66, from Tampa, had years of experience as a school administrator. He often sat through long board meetings, but rarely said a word. When I asked him why, he said, "I don't want to be that old guy who always interrupts." But he wasn't interrupting, he was withholding insight that could help others. When he finally spoke up, without softening his words with an apology, people listened. And more importantly, they asked for his input again. One of the most helpful things you can do is simply speak your mind without dressing it up in apologies. You don't need to be forceful, just direct. Try saying, "I have a thought about that," or "based on my experience." These phrases show confidence without being aggressive, and they help others take your opinion seriously. You've lived through enough to have something to say, and that alone gives your voice value. You don't have to earn the right to speak. You've already earned it. Even a quiet voice deserves a place in the room, and when you speak from experience, people notice. Let me share something I've learned: the best way to stay connected isn't by talking more, but by asking better questions. Many older adults tell me they feel invisible in conversations, like the world around them is speeding up, and they're left nodding along without truly being included. That's not because they have nothing to say. It's because the way people connect today often favors fast responses and surface-level talk. But there's something powerful and timeless about being the person who listens with intention. When you ask a thoughtful follow-up question, you're not just filling silence, you're showing the other person that you care, that you're really hearing them. And when someone feels heard, they begin to see you differently too, not as someone older or quiet, but as someone meaningful to talk to. I remember Bill, 66, from Richmond, Virginia, who told me he often felt like a ghost around his grandkids. They'd scroll through their phones while he sat there, feeling like furniture. One afternoon, instead of trying to start a story or share advice, he simply asked his grandson, "Why did you choose that video game?" That one question led to a whole conversation about design, characters, and even school. Bill didn't pretend to know the topic, he just stayed curious. Another woman I met, Eleanor, 70, from Portland, used to feel like she couldn't keep up with her daughter's fast-paced life. But she started asking, "How did that make you feel?" after her daughter shared something stressful. At first, it felt awkward, but eventually, her daughter opened up more and more. Eleanor told me it was the first time in years she felt like they were really talking, not just exchanging schedules. What often helps is to pause and ask a small follow-up, like, "What happened next?" Or, "What did you think about that?" You don't need to offer advice, just show that you care. These kinds of questions deepen conversations without making them heavier or longer. They give the other person room to reflect and draw them closer to you without pressure. You don't have to speak the most to matter the most. Being a good listener is like being a strong anchor, quiet, steady, and trusted. And even one gentle question can remind someone that you're still a safe harbor in their life. Here's something that often gets overlooked: your stories still matter, and they can mean more than you think. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to feel like your experiences are outdated or not relevant, especially when you're surrounded by people younger than you. But I'll tell you something I've seen over and over again: facts get forgotten, but personal stories stick. They move people. They connect generations. And yet, I meet so many older adults who hesitate to share, thinking their past is either boring, too personal, or no longer useful. But that's rarely true. When you open up and talk about a real moment from your life, no matter how small, it shows others who you are, and it reminds them that wisdom doesn't always come from a lecture. It often comes from lived experience. One story I'll never forget came from Eleanor, 69, who lives in Denver. She once told me that after her husband passed, she took a solo trip to New Mexico, the first time she'd ever traveled alone. It wasn't some dramatic adventure, but it meant something big to her. A few months later, at a community potluck, someone asked if she'd ever been to Santa Fe, and she quietly shared the story of that trip. To her surprise, people leaned in, asked questions, and one woman later told her, "I've been afraid to travel alone too, but now I think I might try." Another man I met, Gerald, 72, from Chicago, used to say his stories didn't matter anymore. But when he finally talked about growing up in a 2-room apartment with 4 siblings, his grandson looked at him with new eyes, like he was seeing strength in places he never noticed before. Gerald said, "That was the first time in years he asked me something that wasn't about sports." What often helps is to start simple. Share a small, specific story that taught you something, made you laugh, or changed you. You don't need to teach a lesson or make a point, just be honest. That honesty builds bridges. The truth is, your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You don't need to be an author or a speaker. Just you telling your truth can be more powerful than you realize. Even one quiet memory can light up a whole conversation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just being fully present speaks volumes. Many older adults tell me they feel like they've faded into the background, especially in group settings, like their presence no longer carries weight if they're not actively speaking. And I Get that? There's a subtle shift that happens when others begin assuming you have nothing to add simply because you're quiet. But silence isn't the problem, it's detachment. When you sit at the edge of a room, avoid eye contact, or disengage from what's going on, people naturally stop noticing you. The key isn't to talk more, it's to lean in, literally and figuratively. Being present doesn't mean being loud. It means showing with your body, your eyes, and your energy that you are there, aware, engaged, and still very much part of the moment. I once worked with Tom, 73, a retired postman from Ohio, who told me he felt invisible at his daughter's weekly family dinners. He'd sit at the table, eat quietly, and let the younger folks talk around him. They just don't need me in the conversation anymore, he said. But I asked him a simple question: when you're at that table, are you showing them you're still there with them? Turns out he was sitting back, arms crossed, barely looking up. So, at the next dinner, he changed just one thing. He leaned in slightly, made eye contact with whoever was speaking, and smiled when he agreed. By the end of the meal, his granddaughter turned to him and said, "What do you think, Grandpa?" Another woman I spoke with, Denise, 70, from Arizona, told me she no longer tried to join her church group discussions. But when she began nodding along and keeping her posture open, people started turning toward her more naturally. They included me, she said, even before I said a word. One of the easiest ways to reconnect without forcing words is to stay gently engaged. A look, a smile, a small nod can show you're part of the moment. You don't need to dominate the room. You just need to be in it, not around it. Presence is not about noise, it's about energy. And yours still carries weight. You may not realize it, but when you choose to show up fully and without hiding, others feel that. Quiet doesn't mean absent. It can mean strong, centered, and very much seen. If you recognized yourself in even one of these examples, that's already a step forward. Leave a comment and let us know which advice spoke to you most. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell. Each new video is like a conversation with someone who truly gets it. And please, remember, you're not a burden. You're not too late. You are valuable. And life goes on, especially when you hold it by the hand.